to be, for example, a program designed to make people comfortable with fecal matter. In both the movie W, directed by Oliver Stone, and in the movie Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, starring Michael Cera, the term shit sandwich was used both times for no real reason. In the spring of 2004, shortly before the movie incident, the voices became as bad as they were in 2001. This was after I dropped the medication Zyprexa and went on the medication Geodon. This change was done carelessly because I thought the voices were a separate entity from my brain chemistry. Apparently I was wrong. That does not, however, mean that all the voices I've heard have been schizophrenia related, because there are mechanical sounding voices as well as messages given to me by other people and the messages I've gotten from media outlets and other things I've touched on here. Early on during that stint in the spring of 2004, I met a man who appeared to be homeless who went by the name Buddy Cakes. I was grandiose and mistaken about a few things when I interacted with him. I did not give this man my phone number or my last name, and yet somehow he called me weeks later at my home. He blurted out numbers, seemingly stating codes for whoever was listening over the wire. He started giving me a lecture on Christianity, and I was immediately fed up. And I let him know. This was how the conversation ended. I ended up in suburban hospital again that spring of 2004, and the emergency room doctor was the same man who terrified me 4 years earlier, Dr. Swan. He sat me down inside a solitary confinement room and then walked me out of the room, down the hall. He asked me questions as we walked to evaluate my sanity. He made a point about the importance of knowing which day of the week it was. Which day of the week it was. Something that many people are obviously not aware of, and yet in their right mind, of course. Then I was led back to the confinement room, and the taste of freedom was over. I was finally left alone in there. After a few minutes of isolation, Dr. Swan opened the door and accused me of manipulating him 5 days earlier. He said this with anger, as if I had done something wrong to him. This was someone who I did not know and hadn't interacted with at all around that time. The next time he opened the door, he told me not to move. He said, and I quote, "You've been training to sit there your whole life." This made me nervous, and I believe that was his intention. Earlier, he pointed out that he was watching me through the camera in the upper right-hand corner of the room. This made me think that he was waiting to have an excuse to keep me there. This quote-unquote care I was receiving was more like a test of mental might in extreme conditions. I began to panic severely and pushed at the door. Soon the door opened and I was taken up to the ward. From then on, I had a newfound sympathy for people who spend long periods of time in rooms like that one. Sometime during my stay at Suburban, there was a group activity that involved purple hand grips shaped like the S of Seroquel, which is a psychiatric medication. These were squishy pieces of purple foam shaped like the Seroquel insignia. We were encouraged to squeeze them in our hands. I was tossed one of these things all of a sudden, and the nurse said, "Catch." I caught it without gripping it. Even slightly gripping one of these things caused a pain in my hand because the double curve shape, the S shape, was unstable. It was unstable. My opinion is that they were designed intentionally to hurt the hand. Sometime around then, a group from outside the hospital, somewhere in the community, came to visit the ward to converse with patients. From what I could tell, this was a community service type of operation. For some reason, these people were literally affected with the concept of evil. One guy insisted that I was evil, and we weren't even talking about anything related to that. Dr. George was my psychiatrist during that stay in Suburban in 2004. I think 10 days in, I signed what is called the 72-hour agreement. This is a form that guarantees that a case will be reviewed before a judge to determine if the patient is fit to be released. This happens after 72 hours. In the middle of that 3-day period, instead of waiting for my case to be reviewed, Dr. George took matters into his own hands and committed me to a different hospital. He did not tell me about this in person. I got a phone call one night after dinner, and over the phone he essentially told me what was going on. As he was telling me that I had been committed, an ambulance crew came onto the ward. I was given no time to think. I was put on the spot and embarrassed. They strapped me to a gurney and brought me by ambulance to the critical ward at Washington Adventist Hospital in Tacoma Park, Maryland. At that hospital, one of the nurses was a man who went by the name Ray. Once he was trying to get me to take Haldol. I refused and took a step back. He was annoyingly close to me at that time. He took a step forward when I took that step back, seemingly to instigate something. Okay. One day he called a couple security officers to the ward for no apparent reason. I found them at the bottom of the hall as I was leaving my room. I had gotten up simply for the sake of getting up. I walked up to these officers and asked them why they were there. I forget exactly what they said, but they seemed surprised. They were there to pick up a patient and maybe move the patient to an even more secure facility. They went up to Ray and essentially asked him who was causing the disturbance. And Ray pointed out a random person who was standing in the hall. He said, "The guy with the hat." Ray, the guy with the hat, and the officers went into a room. After a few seconds, the officers came out looking like they had just been threatened. There was no disturbance, and there was no patient to take off the ward. Someone somewhere had a plan that backfired. In late 2006 or early 2007, I found some blue crumbly material in the glove compartment of my car. I never found out what this material was. It got on my hands. There were many sharp pieces of it. Stuck to this material was an official sticker from the Department of Defense. I called up the Pentagon around that time and was connected to a secure line. The man on the other end said this line was for authorized personnel only. I asked him then why I was talking to him. He then said he was terminating the phone call and hung up. Okay, the photographs in the New York Times magazine often contain quote-unquote hidden messages. I saved a copy of the March 23rd, 2008 edition because of all the symbolisms that were being used. There are many indicators of covert activity in all types of media. Alright, that'll do it for this video. Any intelligent comments and or discussion about the issues raised here would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.